how will Rajat affect, one is, well, how would Rajat affect our life? Rajat is the belief that people will return before the Day of Judgment. And there's two quick answers to that. Number one, not every belief is meant to have a direct effect on our life. Like, for example, the prohibition of interest. Right? The Quran takes a very strong position against interest. Now, honestly speaking, interest often is a good thing. Right? It gives me a kind of predictable profit. It can be very useful. But there's certain times in human life when interest can be very damaging. When there is a loss of a job, social upheaval, inflation, all of a sudden somebody can be destroyed because of compounded interest. Even though normally it might even help regulate economic relationships. Right? So sometimes in Islam we have certain principles that are not because they're supposed to affect us at all times, but they're important or they're taught because they develop a relevance in certain times. So Raj'ah, it might not have a direct effect all over in our life, but it might be something that will prepare us for certain types of tests or certain types of trials. And we have examples of that within Islam, right? When we look at certain parts of the life of the Ahlul Bayt, we talk about so many different things in the life of Ahlul Bayt. Many of those stories are not situations you and I are going to face. But how do I know? Which of us knows, God forbid, if we're going to have to suffer the loss of a young member of our family? I can't predict it. If I suffer a tragic loss, if a parent's child dies, right, there's nothing that that parent can do at that time to help them through that grieving process cleanly. Right? It's a very difficult test if somebody has to go through it. But if a person is familiar with the philosophy of life, the process of grieving, the examples of the Prophet losing his children, our imams losing their children, it can give some preparation and some context that, God forbid, if I ever have to suffer that, then I can rely on that developed capital and I can get a benefit from it. Does that make sense? So when it comes to Raj'ah, what is the capital that it gives us? That's the question. It might come daily in my life, it might not come daily in my life, but it gives preparation. The capital that we get from Raj'ah is a reminder that certain sins and certain good deeds definitely will have a worldly reward. If I am told by you that, there's a lot of police in this neighborhood, you will definitely get caught if you speed, then I won't speed. If you tell me that there's police in the neighborhood, you have a 50% chance of getting caught, or you might get caught, but you have to pay the fine in 20 years, then I might still not want to get caught, but I'll take it easier. Raj'ah tells us that the relationship between certain good deeds and reward, certain bad deeds and punishment, is so strong that Allah will reward or punish them in this life. And if you happen to die before you get that punishment, then Allah will bring you back to life, and this dunya you'll get the jaza before the hereafter. So it's like there's police roaming around everywhere in the neighborhood. There are rewards that are within this world. It reminds us that there is a very close connection between our actions and the result. So even if I'm at the end of my life and I realize that I might not be able to, for example, witness the appearance of the Imam, I still believe, or I have a reason to believe that I might be able to witness it because death is not a barrier. The connection between the reward for my sincerity and my goodness and the actions, the punishment for evil and the actions is close.
I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I'm not convinced by this because suppose that I'm a person who's doing lots of good deeds, but I'm not basically see all the consequences of the good deeds that I've done and die. So based on the description of the paradise and meeting God and being with God that is described in Quran, I think that any person would like to come back and experience those gifts or rewards in this world. Because
no, there's a difference. So the philosophy.
Before you believe Rajat, you should believe on Ma'ad. Yeah, and that's more.
No, but there's a problem. This conversation that we're having is not a conversation where we are deciding for God, should you teach Rajat or not? Right? If I'm teaching God that, I think this is a good idea, put Rajat as part of your Islamic teachings or don't put Rajat, then we can have this conversation. No.
Just define whether such thing is useful or not.
No, so there's two perspectives that we can have. One perspective is I want to get the logic so that I can decide, is this to be part of my Islamic teachings or not? Right? Then we can say that once we have ma'ad, why do we need raj'at? Ma'ad is enough. Right? If I'm making my religion, then I can say, you know what, I don't need this spare tire. I have the very good tire, it's not going to go flat. Ma'ad is a real solid teaching, I don't need a spare tire. But that's not our perspective. Our perspective is, God has given us a spare tire. Right? We have to see why He might have done so. So we're starting from the place that the Imams have taught Raj'at. Our job is to try to see what might be the reason why they emphasized it. If we're not convinced that they emphasized it, then we can look at the authority and see, is it even an authentic teaching or not? That's a fair point. That I can argue or you can argue that I'm not convinced. These hadith are weak or they're made up. But if we're convinced they're made up, then you and I don't have the right to say that, well, why did they need to teach it? They had ma'ad. God knows what His purpose was, and if He wants to give, quote unquote, spare tire or an additional reminder, then it's His religion, He can do so. Does that make sense? So we're not asking it to try to justify whether Raj'at is true or not. We're asking it to try to understand what might be the reason why it was emphasized, assuming that it is authentic.
Yeah, but then these reasons does not make sense. There are some things like soul or roof, which God says to the Prophet that you don't know about it. Yeah, so these are, I think Raj'at would be categorized as a soul as well. We really don't know about it. We just try to justify it by some.
No, and that's fine to justify it, because we're not. Our job when we're justifying it is to try to understand what might be the reasons. The fact is, for me, right? If I read Dua al-Ahd, it's a very different emotional and psychological effect it has on me than if I believe, well, if I can be alive when the Imam comes, great. If not, then I'll meet him in Jannah. Logically, you're right. You have ma'ad. If you don't meet the Imam in this world, while you prayed for him, you said, Dua al-Faraj, and you didn't meet the Imam, you'll meet him in the hereafter. That's all good and true. But, if you're a Shia and you can just practice this in your life, read Dua al-Faraj for a week. Read, in Hala bayni wa baynahu al-mawtu alladhi ja'altahu ala ibadika khatman maqdiya. If death intervenes, then, oh Allah, break the barrier of death and bring me back. That psychological and that emotional effect is real. Right? There's no denying that it's real. The idea that death by itself is not a barrier between actions and reward, or actions and punishment. It is psychologically and emotionally a very powerful teaching. It's brought out in ahadith. That's brought out in du'as. It does have an effect for how we appreciate that Karbala will end. It can have an emotional effect on people being ready to sacrifice or not being ready to sacrifice. Logically, could God have done it without Raj'at? Yeah, of course He could have. Right? That's above my pay grade. It's God's decision whether to teach it or not. But if it is taught, is there a psychological or a spiritual or a potential real world effect in terms of my connection? Right? That's certainly visible.
I think we can use the same logic to say even the resurrection day is not necessary. If you believe in God and God says something, you should do that. We don't need to have.
Or you don't need to have a resurrection.
Yeah.
You can just have the punishment of, why is there adhab al-qabr? Why is there adhab in qiyamah? Why is there sirat, right? the bridge of sirat? Why is there qifuhum innahum mas'ulun?
The same, yeah. From the moment that your soul actually gets away from your body, after that.
Well, just like those are the same, Raj'at is also part of that. A hadith tell us that Raj'at is also the beginning of Qiyamah. It's just Qiyamah, beginning that comes from this world. Question?
Now I wanted to mention that this is Rajat is not something new. It's been mentioned in the Quran with
Yeah, numerous verses indicate.
Musa and other humans who have been brought back to life for a lesson or something. So it's Rajat is, I think, similar to that. God brings back the most highest and the most hated, and then for a lesson and for their punishment reward.
Sometimes psychologically, for a person who has been the victim of a great crime, to know that the criminal will be punished in this world, by itself, brings psychological closure, right? And so these are effects that we can find for Raja. If you're looking for a logical justification, that here, this is the proof, because of this, God has to teach Raja, you're not going to find that. If you're going to find a conclusive proof that's going to convince you that this is, something that is certainly a part of Islam, it's going to be difficult to find. Just like every other teaching that we have within Islam, right? What we can do is we can say, is this a teaching of Islam or not? If it is, what insight or wisdom can we gain about it? If it's not, then it's not. So Raj'at is taught by Imams, and it's an old teaching, it's referenced in the Quran, and it's explicitly mentioned in a hadith. What are the effects? In my mind, the psychological effects are that it gives us a very close connection between action and consequence. Much closer and more intimate than is from this world and the hereafter. That's one example of Raj'a in previous ummahs. Yes. Yes. That's one example of being brought back to life. That doesn't prove Raj'a at the end of time, but it does prove that Raj'a is not something outside of the practice of God. He did it in the previous ummah, and there's no reason to believe that he wouldn't do it at the end of time.
Can you say also that this is part of harassment of God?
Yes. All of the different stages of reward and punishment are part of God's mercy. One of the stages of God's punishment and reward is Raj'a. The next stage is Adabul Qabr. The next stage is the adab and the reward on the day of judgment itself. Right? Some people will have hisab, some people will not have hisab. Then the next stage will be temporarily going to hell for those people who have not yet been purified of their sins. And then eternal reward and punishment. No, Raj'a is not for ordinary people. Raj'a is for those who have, ordinary people are still kind of potential. They have bil quwwa attributes. Raj'a is for those who have changed their potential into to actual good or evil. So I might still be kind of on the journey, and I haven't fully brought my soul to either a good or a bad result. Right? The Raj'a applies, just like adab of qabr, adab of the day of judgment, will apply to certain types of crimes. Not every evildoer is going to find out that they are going to hellfire in the grave. Some people will only find out on the day of judgment. So each of those stages has a certain wisdom. That wisdom is not always going to be fully understandable to our logic, but it has a certain logic and a complete principle. Sisters, we didn't get any chance to get your participation, so is there any questions or comments from the sisters, please?
Following that question,
Sure.
so does that consider to be only who has done the worst, or is that considered to be?
Yeah, those who've done the worst or those who've done the best.
So did that two?
The extremes. That's what the ahadith of Raj'at say. So, because it's the very good deeds that deserve a worldly reward, or the very evil deeds. Many people, they might get it right in this world. Right? So if I do a terribly evil deed, I will get punished in this world even before I die. But if for some historical reason or some divine wisdom, that reward is not able to come to me in this world, then it will happen in this world. It's also one last hujjah. So the whole purpose of qiyamah is a hujjat of God. Right? Otherwise, really there's no reason for qiyamah. We should just wake up and go to heaven or hell. Right? The whole reason for the stage of qiyamah that is mentioned very often in the Quran is to give a proof to people that, look, I gave you a chance. You can check your account. God's math is right. Right? You could have done right, you didn't. Right? So everybody will get a chance. Everybody will get an audit. Our organs and our limbs will speak. Right? So the whole point of that is to have a hujjah. So one part of giving that hujjah is, for example, if Yazid and Imam Hussein are back in this world, and that conclusion that wasn't achieved historically is achieved in this world. Just as qiyamah is unnecessary, right? But it's keeping that hujjah, or completing that hujjah, raj'ah is also helping to complete that hujjah, because we'll see with our own hands that this is why it was evil. This is why Imam Hussein was successful. It's fine. One point, and then back to the sisters. Go ahead. Sure.
I was wondering, is there any certain criteria of a qualification a person has to meet to be experienced raj'ah? And if a person will know before she or he dies that he will be
Some people might know before they die,
or
but the criteria that's mentioned in hadith is those who are firm in unbelief or firm in belief. That's the standard that we're given in a hadith.
you mean by experiencing yaqeen? That would be a criteria, or would be less than that?
The hadith mention those who are so it's mahdul iman and mahdul kufr. Those who are pure in iman and pure in kufr, right? On the side of iman it would be yaqeen. On the side of kufr it would be juhud, which is obstinacy, and also doing good and doing evil. I think last question then on raj'ah.
Actually, I have heard some people say that, for example, Allah creates this bad guy like Shem and Yazid, right? For them to become better person.
That is sometimes mentioned by Urafa in general, and even in Dua Kumail we have, the phrase that لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلال معانديك لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كانت لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما. So there is in Irfani discourse, and sometimes even in some of these du'as, like this sentence in Dua Kumail, the expression that, why, oh God, do you have punishment? If it weren't for your own promise, then you would have let everybody go to heaven eventually, right? So this is an area that we don't have explicit Islamic teaching. What Islam has told us is that hell is for punishment. Might hell and the torture of hell be a means for cleansing and eventually bringing some people back to heaven? Maybe. And we do have some hadith that will be the case for mu'mineen who have sinned a lot. But will it be the case for any unbelievers? Right? That's above our pay grade. So raj'ah might have that role, just like qiyamah itself might have that role. But anytime you have a question like this, is raj'ah rehabilitation or is it punishment? The same thing applies to raj'ah that applies to qiyamah itself. The same thing applies to raj'ah that applies to the akhirah. And the akhirah, we don't know that.
Like the Hindus that we come to.
No. It's not a cyclical thing, that's for sure. That's not mentioned in any hadith. But is there a rehabilitative element in it? Or is it entirely jaza and punishment? Well, qiyamah is for punishment and reward, as the Quran says. But then there is still a possibility that for some people that there will be a rehabilitation or a kind of cleansing that God will give. In the end, God knows his wisdoms better. And if he decides to forgive some of the kuffar or some of the people in paradise, in hell, or even all of them, we don't have any objection to it. It's not our job. And Allah, I only became a believer because I wanted this person to go to hell. That's not our role. So in Qiyamah and in Raj'a we can't say. We do believe, and there's many hadith that tell us that unbelievers will not be treated equal to believers. Right? A person said that, well, what if people get, forgiven for their sins? And Imam Ja'far Sadiq in one hadith explicitly says that, Wallahi la yaf'alu dhalika bikum abada. Allah will never do that where iman just becomes equal to unbelief. But if unbelievers are after a period of punishment and cleansing brought to it, we can't say. It's not our job to say.